Hello everyone. Welcome to this very exciting lecture about CBT, Stoicism, Perfectionism and Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. Today we're going to be talking with Tim LeBon. He graduated from Oxford with a first-class degree in philosophy, politics and economics. He then studied philosophy as a master's and cognitive therapy. He's also a researcher and a therapist, a coach and a lecturer. And he's also a Stoic life coach and a CBT therapist. So we're going to have office hours after the talk, and that's your opportunity also to ask whatever questions are on your mind. So I hope you're as excited as I am for this really nice lecture. And yeah, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. How are people enjoying the conference so far? How's Oslo? So thank you so much to EAGxNordics for inviting me. I know that a lot of people here set the bar very high for themselves. Is that true? To achieve and also to do good. But sometimes that can cause suffering. And so I hope if that's the case for you or people you know, then this talk can help. So there's going to be quite a lot of slides. I'm not going to read every word, but please feel free to take pictures of slides. And I'll also be giving kind of pointers of further resources. If you haven't had enough of hearing me by the end of the day, you can always go back to that podcast on the 80,000 Hours podcast. But I will be expanding on that today in terms of perfectionism and also imposter syndrome. So that's what we're going to cover. So if I said the letters CBT, how many of you would think that was something to do with motorbikes, which you'll sometimes find if you go on the internet? But how many of you know, let's just show of hands, how many of you know quite a lot about CBT already? Okay, so many of you. How many of you came to this talk thinking it was about motorbikes? No, how many came but without knowing not so much about CBT, but interested? Okay, so I won't assume that you know a huge amount, and I'll spend about 15 minutes talking about cognitive behavioural therapy. Then we're going to move on to perfectionism, short definition, unrelenting standards pursued even when they're counterproductive. And then imposter syndrome, believing you're a fraud, usually in a work or academic setting. As was said, no time for Q&A, but I'd be thrilled if you joined me in office hours afterwards. Why was I invited to talk about these two topics? Well, surveys show that effective altruists, those in the community, like other people, can and do periodically suffer from mental health issues. Why might they suffer particularly from perfectionism and imposter syndrome? Well, I've had a few conversations with people so far, and it seems that everyone I've spoken to is really bright. So if you're really bright, as I think you all are, that becomes part of your identity. Yeah? So you are probably a sort of person who sees yourself as someone who achieves a lot by setting and keeping to high standards. Does that make sense? Is that true? Now the problem, and that can be really good, but the problem arises when those unrelenting standards become the be-all and end-all, and you don't set any time aside for other things in life. You might be a long-termist about other things, but not about your own well-being. So I think that's why effective altruists can sometimes be prone to dysfunctional perfectionism that backfires. Second thing, effective altruists want to do a lot of good, yeah? But what if every moment of the day you're thinking, how do I do the most good? So I've not just got to do a perfect job, I've got to be a perfect altruist. How much pressure is that? Is that anything anyone can live up to? So that is the second part of perfectionism that I think can particularly affect some people in the effective altruist community. Finally, there you are. You're bright. You've aced it at school. Maybe you've done very well at university. You're in a job or you're in a meeting and you look around and there are some people who you perceive as even brighter than you. Does that happen to anyone? Maybe in a new role, and you're overawed by these people with their PhDs and... Do you start to feel a bit of a fraud? Maybe I don't belong here. And that is why some people in the effective altruism community might be prone to imposter syndrome. Now, hopefully, those things aren't affecting you at the moment. If they are, I hope what we're going to talk about is going to be helpful. If not, then I hope it will help you help other people you work with, perhaps. So, a quick check-in. This isn't a diagnostic tool, but there are going to be certain moments when I ask you to reflect, maybe write things down, other moments when I ask you to talk to your neighbour. But this is just a quick check-in. In your head, perhaps, scale yourself 1, not at all, 5, extremely true, on these 3 questions. You might answer them to yourself as we go along. I base my self-worth largely on how perfectly I perform tasks. 1 to 5. Others have told me that I have realistic or inflexible standards. 1 to 5. Fear of making mistakes often holds me back from starting or finishing things. 1 to 5. So everyone, please add up your scores. You don't have to tell anyone what it is, but for your own benefit, if it's under 6, then, you're probably not a perfectionist. If it's over 11, then you could be prone to dysfunctional perfectionism. Okay, as I say, if you want to take a picture of any slides, feel free to do so. This is a quick self-check about imposter syndrome. Slightly different scale. How often do you feel you've fooled others into thinking you're more competent than you really are? 0, never, up to 3, almost always. When you succeed, how likely are you to attribute it to luck, timing, or help from others rather than your own abilities? 0, never, 3, almost always, or somewhere in between. And finally, do you ever worry that you'll be found out as not good enough despite evidence of your achievements? So again, add up your scores, and it goes from 0, you seem pretty grounded, up to 8 or 9, where you've strong imposter feelings. Okay. As I said, I'm not asking you your specific scores, but I am interested into how many people would say they have low scores both for imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Okay, that's great. How many people would say they're affected more by perfectionism? Perfectionism seems to be an issue, but not imposter syndrome. That's quite a high number. How many people would say imposter syndrome is the main issue? Okay, quite a few there as well. And how many people would say both? Quite a lot. Okay, you're in the right place. So you're not a fraud being here. Okay, so cognitive behavioural therapy, some of you know a lot about it, but I hope that for those that don't, this kind of 10-minute primer will be helpful, not just for perfectionism and imposter syndrome, but for other things, because cognitive behavioural therapy is useful for all kinds of issues. So, Stoic roots. Back in the day, Epictetus said, we are affected not by things, but by interpretations. So, for instance, after this presentation, you're strolling through the building, and you see someone, and you've worked with them before, and you smile at them, and they ignore you. This side of the room, imagine that your interpretation, your thought is, they ignored me deliberately. How would you feel? Just shout out. How would you feel? They ignored me deliberately. negative, bad, one way or another. This side of the room, imagine you've got a different interpretation. They're being absent-minded, or they're really absorbed in still thinking about Tim Stork, perhaps. How do you feel then? What kind of emotions come up? Yeah? You're okay. So it's the same event, but a different interpretation, very different emotions. So what Epictetus and the Stoics said is, this is the key, this is the empowering key to emotional well-being. Because whilst we can't control events, we've got much more control over how we see things. Now, it's very important to say that this isn't a recipe just for positive thinking. Yeah? So we do see things through the lens, you could say, of our glasses that we put on. But CBT isn't about rose-tinted spectacles. It's about realistic and helpful spectacles. That's the lens that CBT trains us to try and use as much as possible. And to do with that, we go on to the second point, which is behavioural change. So we'll be talking later about experiments you can do to test things out. So that example I gave, somebody appears to blank you, or maybe they're just very absorbed. You don't just kind of sit with that interpretation. You might message them, how are you doing? Or tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, remember me? So you're testing out your thoughts rather than just assuming that your first thought is correct. There are other kinds of behavioural change in CBT as well, like exposing yourself to things that you fear. So I should say a little bit about how CBT evolved. A bunch of psychoanalysts like Aaron T. Beck, Albert Ellis, 50s and 60s, weren't finding great results using the kind of Freudian techniques, so they turned to the Stoics and other ideas for a kind of more common sense approach, which would be, what's the problem they're facing? What are their thoughts? What are their behaviours? What's working for them? What isn't? CBT began then, and since then, it's grown into something much bigger than it was originally. Very importantly, it's not just a rag bag of techniques. I'll be talking about, I don't know, probably more than a dozen techniques today. But it's not just techniques, because what you do, if you're a client coming with CBT therapy, is you try and draw out a map of your problem and the kind of thinking and the kind of behaviours that are keeping that problem going. Okay, we'll see this in how this works for imposter syndrome and perfectionism later. Does that make sense? So you're not just saying, oh, think differently about this. You're trying to find out what is keeping the problem going for you. And when I studied CBT in detail, what I learned was that there isn't just one CBT, there are many CBTs. So there is a CBT for depression, there's a CBT for post-traumatic stress disorder, for examples. And there are CBT for the two conditions we're looking at today. So that's important, because it's not like just giving you a very general map, which would say well-being is about how you think and what you do. It's actually researchers have gone and looked at what maintains dysfunctional perfectionism, for example. Efficient. Well, I'm a CBT therapist, I would say that, wouldn't I? But the point is that it would only look at childhood if it was considered to be important for your distress and your disorder to do so. It's collaborative, so it's good for people that like working in a team. It's very targeted. It's good for people that like numbers and to track progress. I imagine quite a lot of those in the effective altruist community would say that that fits them, as it would being scientific and evidence-based. But I need to also mention, particularly in a talk about perfectionism, that CBT is not perfect. It's not necessarily a magic bullet. So I was chatting earlier with someone and saying that I work in the National Health Service in the UK, and we have targets where you've got to achieve a certain success rate, which means people go from having a clinical level of a problem to below the clinical level. What do you think that success rate is, anyone? Any guesses? Okay. It's about 50%. And that's hard to achieve. So we're using CBT, we're well trained, we're well supervised, and 50% is considered good. So clearly, you could be one of the 50% which it doesn't help. And that may be just because it's not the right time, it may be because it's not the right therapy, it might not be the right therapist. So, very importantly, if you do have CBT and you find that it isn't so helpful, don't blame yourself, okay? Could be all kinds of other reasons why it's not helping. Okay, so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about CBT in general. Don't believe everything you read, but also don't believe everything you think. So, how many people here consider themselves a logical, rational person? How many people here, when they're in fight and flight, or kind of distressed or worried about something, sometimes aren't so logical or rational? Glad that it's not just me. So these are the kind of things that can happen. We jump to conclusions. There's not enough evidence, but we assume something. All or nothing thinking. This means that we put something into one category or another. You're for me or you're against me. I'm a total success or I'm a total failure. We catastrophize. This paper has had this paper won't be a success, and so it means my total career is a failure. I'm a flop just because one thing doesn't work. Discounting the positive. So you look out for criticism, but something good happens, and you say, yeah, I was just lucky. Yeah, they were just being nice. Does anyone resonate with any of those? And if you're... So part of CBT is telling people about these so-called thinking traps and asking them which they identify with. And as I said, this is one you might want to take a picture of. That link has got a lot more thinking traps than those. But these are the ones that I picked as being probably most relevant to the topics for today. Gosh, that's a busy slide, isn't it? I'm not going to read through it all, but I wanted to include it because this technique, STOP, is probably the one technique that clients, particularly those who are effective altruists, would say is the most useful. It's a tool for calmer, wiser thinking. There's a link where I've produced a version in Word which has this and also a blank template. Feel free to use it, give it to friends, etc. But what this is doing is it's giving you that space when something happens to stop. It's an acronym. Have a time out to get from triggered fight or flight to being calmer. Maybe just a few short breaths. I was working with someone the other day who was neurodivergent. For him, it was a kind of fidget. But it would be very personal. What grounds you? It's important to find that out. You observe what's going on. And my favourite way of doing this is to say, imagine this being a graphic cartoon and there's a speech bubble which explains your distress. You know, in this case, Ingrid is feeling anxious and she observes, I will be exposed as a fraud. She's thinking of writing a post on the Effective Altruism Forum. She feels anxious and it's, I will be exposed, that's causing that anxiety. Anyone identify with this at all? Yeah, something that you might know someone who sometimes feels a bit like this. So what STOP does is, first of all, you're writing it down, and that's a good first step. But sometimes you can then feel even more anxious. So people often avoid doing this. So it's when you get to this fourth step, pull back and get perspective, where you look at what thinking trap am I possibly falling foul of here. In this case, pretty much all of them. And then the really important bit is the more helpful perspective, where you kind of say, what would a friend say to me? What would I say to a friend? What's a rational, realistic way of looking at things? And the last P, I really, really like this because it's practicing what works based on the wise perspective. So as I say, it's not just about thinking things, it's about doing things differently or testing them out. Now, in this case, Ingrid, she's a fictional character who suffers from imposter syndrome, this helps her. She's 80% better. But she still doesn't go the whole way. She's going to do the post, but she's going to post it anonymously. And she's going to ask lots of friends for reassurance. Is this okay? So do you see that she's still buying into the idea that she might be a fraud? So this will help, this technique, but sometimes it's not the whole answer. And that's where CBT digs deeper. And we look at core beliefs, views about yourself and the world, like I'm a fraud, for which you want to reality test. Chip away at those beliefs. Get evidence against it. And personal rules or standards, we'll be talking about standards and rules today. And these are rules that kind of you've unconsciously adopted because otherwise you think it will be terrible. So I must do everything perfectly. And then this main CBT strategy for that is to devise other standards and to test them out, see which work best. Is it, for instance, fine if you try and do good enough for a day? What actually happens then? Does the world collapse, or do people not even notice? Except maybe your friends and partner, because suddenly you're available. Okay, so that's general purpose CBT. Now we're moving on to perfectionism and what that looks like. That's the kind of longer definition. It's what's called a transdiagnostic approach. So there are lots of mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, eating disorders associated with it. And perfectionism often drives these. Who here has watched The Good Place? The rest of you, CBT homework is to watch it. And in particular, take notice of Chidi, one of my favourite characters, who literally gets a stomachache every time he's got a decision to make. Not just big decisions, but little decisions. Why? Because he's a perfectionist. He's got to do the perfect thing. And you can't necessarily know what the right thing to do is. So it works against him. And that's dysfunctional perfectionism. Now, anyone recognise him? Well done. One of Norway's finest sons. And he is a great chess player. He attends to a lot of detail. He gets great results. But he's actually gone on record as saying he's not a perfectionist, which is really interesting. And I think there's two ways in which he's actually a very good role model. One is that when he plays chess, he says he doesn't always look for the perfect move. He just tries to beat the opponent. It's quite pragmatic. So you might relate that to things you're doing. Be pragmatic rather than try and get the absolutely perfect solution. And secondly, and just as importantly, he plays football and he does yoga. So that's when I was talking about long-termism. His long-termism is about his own well-being. He knows he's not going to keep going as a chess player if he's studying chess theory 24/7. We're looking for good role models in our workplace as well. Who is a good role model? And if we're managers, then I think we can try and be that good role model, or parents or friends. So it's always a good discussion to have, I find, when I'm working with perfectionists. Actually, is your perfectionism working for you or against you? Remember I was talking about maps that you draw out as in CBT. This is one that comes from a book on perfectionism, from CCI actually. It's actually not as complicated as it looks. Shall I talk you through it very quickly? It goes something like this. You set yourself very high, unrelenting standards. It's part of your identity. That's where your self-worth comes from. You think to yourself, I am someone that's an achiever. I do good. I'm good at my work. Then you're in a situation where you need to do something. You set those standards. If you're a perfectionist, a dysfunctional perfectionist, you will then do quite a lot of stuff different from other people, such as excessively checking things, researching too long, researching every bit, going down rabbit holes, even if they're not quite relevant, procrastinating because you're not quite sure if it's good enough or you're in the right mood to do it properly. You engage in some of that perfectionist thinking, like either it's got to be perfect or it's going to be terrible. You're looking out for mistakes. You're worrying that there'll be mistakes. Now, some of these are counterproductive. So very often you will fail to meet the standards, but even if you're kind of trying to do it, really well, because those standards are so unrelenting, it's inevitable. We're not always going to succeed, particularly if we're basing it on outcomes. And so what does a perfectionist do then? Well, they're very harsh usually. Why did I let this happen? Why did I publish that paper? Why didn't I work harder? How are you going to feel after a few days, weeks, months, years of this? Not great. Those are some of the negative things that might come of it. Low mood and anxiety, isolated. You might get health problems, might have sleep problems. Now, there's an extra twist to this, which is that, of course, sometimes you'll meet your standards, but then the kind of dysfunctional perfectionist will say, well, that was easy, what next? And they'll set the bar higher. And so they'll go round and round until they're exhausted and burn out. But there are some positive consequences of being a perfectionist, even a dysfunctional one. It's simple. You know what you've got to do. It provides a structure. It's even socially encouraged, unless it isn't, which is where I'm coming from. Don't encourage people to be like this. So it can take quite a lot of work to change. But this is how we would do it in CBT. So you would use a longer questionnaire than that kind of 3 questions I gave you to try and measure it. We'd assess whether it actually was the driving problem. Psychoeducation, that just means telling you about it, like I've been doing today. Formulation, that's the map. Pros and cons of perfectionism, we might be a homework exercise to try and think about whether it's working for you. Challenge the thinking traps, using STOP that we've looked at. Changing the rules, we'll look at that, how we do that, using behavioural experiments. I want to say a little bit about self-compassion. How many people are familiar with any writings on self-compassion? People like Paul Gilbert, Kristin Neff, there are others as well. CBT is wonderful because it's a bit like a magpie. If something's good and it works, it just kind of says, oh, great, that's part of CBT now. So in the original version of the treatment for perfectionism, there wasn't anything about self-compassion. There is now. Now, if self-compassion is your main issue, then you might benefit from seeing a specialist compassion-focused therapist. But we can do these things in CBT. Coach A and Coach B, how many people have heard of that? Ooh. So, this is something interesting. Imagine that you're 5 years old and you're playing football, you're in a team, you love playing in the team, you're in goal. It's the cup final. At the end of the match, towards the end of the match, someone shoots, you let the goal in. How are you going to feel? Terrible. Then your coach comes up to you and points their finger at you. I'm not going to point at anyone, except, pointing at myself. You're a disgrace. You're terrible. How could you do that? You've let the whole team down. Why didn't you practice more? We went through this in training. How's that going to affect you? You probably wish that the earth would swallow you up. You're going to feel shame. You're not actually going to be motivated to improve, probably. What about Coach B? Coach B is a different type of coach. You know, they might put their arm around you and say, gosh, it's tough, isn't it? I've been there. You know, it's happened to me. You must feel terrible now. How about we meet up tomorrow and we talk about it? And if you want to, we can do some more practicing. How's that going to make you feel? The point is, so most people say, yeah, Coach B is obviously better. But then the question is, how do you talk to yourself when things go wrong? It's obvious that you'd want your child to have a Coach B, but how many of us adopt a self-critical, harsh approach when things don't go right to us? And what impact does that have on us? So try and adopt the Coach B. Try and be constructive, positive, kind. And linked with that is the growth mindset, the idea that there's no such thing as failure, just feedback. If things don't go well, learn from it. That's how we improve. And finally, again, something that didn't originally come from CBT, but values clarification is where you look at your values. We've already said that it's quite natural for people to value achievement and it to be part of their identity if they've achieved well. But what about other things in life? What about other values they can achieve? And there are exercises we can do, and that's a link to a pretty comprehensive set of them. And if you want to find out more about the CBT for perfectionism I'm covering today, those are two very good resources. In fact, the second one, the CCI resources, are actually free. So that's the diagram again, and this is the CBT toolkit for perfectionism. And as you'll see, there's a kind of match. So we do the values clarification to tackle the issue with self-worth. We challenge thinking traps to change the perfectionist thinking and self-compassion so that people aren't so self-critical. Does that make sense? That's why I'm saying it's not a ragbag of techniques, it's targeted. And you do whichever of these you needed to do, because sometimes people wouldn't have all of these issues. So, does it work? Well, it's been going for about 21 years, and the evidence is very good. Undoubtedly the leading treatment for perfectionism. Randomized controlled trials, the gold standard. Large effects for perfectionism itself, but also for disordered eating and depression, medium effects, which are pretty strong. And the conclusion is it's demonstrated its efficacy in lots of different ways. And again, you can read the full text if you want to go into that more. So what about those in the effective altruist community? This is what I was referring to earlier, that there is an extra kink here in that it's not just about achievement, it's about can be about being a perfect, effective altruist. There's a quote from Cameron Meyer-Shaub from the 80,000 Hours podcast. Work-related guilt and shame is by far the biggest source of suffering in my life. Almost every week, I feel really caught up in worrying about whether I've done enough or how bad it was of me to not do enough, or am I working enough hours? Anybody relate to that? That sounds like, I don't know Cameron at all, but it sounds like moral perfectionism. So we're going to briefly try and be co-therapists for Jonas, a fictional character who seems to have dysfunctional perfectionism. There he is with his to-do list. And that's his thought bubble when he's thinking about whether to donate $100 to malaria nets. It's tough being Jonas, isn't it? So I mapped out his own loop. So he hasn't got that little channel of setting his standards higher if he achieves his standards, because he hardly ever achieves them, because he just engages in so much unhelpful behaviours there, rarely taking breaks, going to too much detail, that he nearly always fails, He's a very harsh self-critic. So I just wonder if you think about which of those would be the most helpful for Jonas. Just spend a minute on your own, just thinking about, if you were the therapist for Jonas, where do you think the most help could be given based on what we've talked about today? You might want to jot down an answer if you want. Okay, so this is one that I prepared earlier. So you might do values clarification. One of my favourite exercises, imagine you're 80 years old, looking back in your life. What do you want to say about your life? What's mattered to you? Is it all about achievement? Is it all about being perfect? Or is it about good relationships? Other things that might matter to you. For someone like Jonas, who everything needs to be perfect, a better rule would be some things need to be done very well, but the rest don't really matter. Yeah? And instead of doing the most impactful thing all the time, I will adopt policies that are likely to be impactful. So we're thinking about doing your best, but to some extent letting go of whether it succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, you'll try and learn from it, but you can't control the outcome. So there's no point being too harsh on yourself if something doesn't work out and it's not your fault. He's not delegating, so we'd ask him, for instance, to try and delegate and see if it's helpful, or see if it's as disastrous as he imagines. We might even ask him to make a deliberate minor mistake, a small spelling mistake perhaps, and to see if the world collapses, to prove to himself that it doesn't really matter. Certainly encouraging him to take breaks, etc. Satisficing is what we'd be trying to teach him. The Stoic archer mindset was kind of what I was talking about earlier. So, as well as being a utilitarian, I'm a Stoic, and if anyone wants to know how I square that circle, or whatever the expression is, then come and chat to me afterwards. But the Stoic archer, how many people have done archery or watched archery? You're a long way away, and there's the wind. So even if you do your best, you take fire, it might miss the target. What should the archer do? Should they be really annoyed with themselves if it misses? No, not if they've prepared well, not if they've done their best. That's the Stoic archer. You focus on your intentions. You focus on the process, really. The process. Trust the process. Don't be so obsessed by this particular outcome. And that would be a useful lesson for Jonas, as well as Coach B. Would be very useful for him to try and train him to do that. And the positive consequences would be manifold. More productive, improved mental health, better relationships. Does this make any sense? So, far we've covered CBT and perfectionism, and we've got a bit of time left to look at imposter syndrome. So, full disclosure, I said CBT, there's a lot of evidence for it. Not so much with imposter syndrome, to be honest. So when I started working a lot with effective altruists, and with other people as well, a lot of people said they had imposter syndrome. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't part of our training. There actually are very few. I haven't found a CBT course to train people how to teach it, how to treat it. But there are some books. There's one I'll be talking about a bit later. So there isn't really one of those maps of imposter syndrome in general that's been tried and tested. However, it's pretty clear that imposter syndrome is a combination usually of perfectionism, which we've been talking about, inflexible standards, and low self-esteem, which there is a CBT for by Melanie Fennell. So you put the two together and you get a CBT for imposter syndrome. And there is some evidence it's helpful. And my personal experience working with people is it's pretty helpful a lot of the time. But let's be honest, evidence is fairly limited. So take all of this with, not exactly with a pinch of salt, but with some sort of less of a stamp of this is top-level evidenced work. So we've already said what imposter syndrome is. Originally, in 1978, it was thought to apply just to women. It may apply more to women than to men, but that's probably because imposter syndrome seems to apply to people from marginalised or underrepresented backgrounds, or those who feel they hold low status. So it could be a man, it could be someone from an ethnic minority. It's where people feel that they don't quite fit in often. It is definitely closely linked to a whole host of other problems like anxiety, depression, perfectionism, low self-esteem, and burnout. Now, how many people have read Howie Lempel's post on 80,000 hours? It's a classic, because this was someone, very high status individual in the effective altruist community, who incredibly bravely wrote about his struggles. He did that deliberately to say, hey, look, people with mental health problems, you're not alone. And this is what he said. You know, that he would have these performance evaluations. He would say how he'd done in the last year. He would say, terrible. Other people would say, how have you done? And they would say, great. And even seeing that disparity, he still suffered from imposter syndrome. So, as he says, a very bad case, but very brave to talk about it publicly. Now, we're going to continue talking about Ingrid, fictional case, postdoctoral researcher in AI alignment, writes anonymous posts. No one else thinks she's a fraud, but she does. So she avoids being in the spotlight and feels shame when she compares her progress to her peers. Now, as I said, there isn't really a standardized map. This is something I created, informed by a book by Hibberd, which is the main CBT book on imposter syndrome. So in Ingrid's case, she's the first member of family to go to university. That explains why she feels a little bit out of place. And she also thinks that maybe they just let her in because of affirmative action. So you can see how she might get this thought that I don't deserve to be here. She believes that she's a fraud. She believes that others are much better than her, and that if they got to know her, how she really is, then she'd be exposed. Do you know anyone like that, or can you relate to that at all? And then imagine she's writing this post. She's got ideas about AI and safety, and she's not an expert, but she's got ideas that would be interesting for people to hear, and it would be helpful for her career for people to get to know her work, and she'd learn from posting. But she's sitting there procrastinating. Why is she doing that? Well, because she thinks she's a fraud, and she'll be exposed. But she's also mind reading. Will people really think she's a fraud? She's catastrophizing. Even if people criticized her, would that be the end of the world? All or nothing thinking. Well, maybe some people wouldn't like it, but some people would. Selective attention. This is where she's kind of just looking for criticism, and if someone praises her, she's discounting it. And so because of that, it's not surprising she worries, maybe to a clinical level. She's procrastinating. She's avoiding altogether. She's asking for reassurance. She's trying to stay under the radar. Now, because of that, often she just won't do the post at all. But if she does and she succeeds, then if she discounts the positive, the problem is the belief is unchallenged. That makes sense. It's positive evidence to most people, but to her, it doesn't count. Of course, sometimes she won't succeed, or she won't succeed on her terms. She'll feel a lot of shame. And then because she feels shame, she won't get support, and she'll be even more discouraged from doing it again. And because of that, she won't achieve as much as she could. She actually won't be as helpful to the world as she could, because she could be a great help, but she's not, because she's stuck in this cycle. She might well feel low, anxious, shame as well, low self-esteem. Poor work-life balance, quite probably, because she's kind of trying to do this work the whole time. She won't allow herself time to do other things. Yeah, that might be her thought bubble, which we saw earlier in the stop. She's even got a mug saying, I'm a fraud. Which else has she got? Okay, so this would be the CBT treatment for imposter syndrome. Again, feel free to take a photo of this. If you relate to this, or you know someone that does, The Imposter Cure would be the book to buy. There's some good posts by Luisa Rodriguez and by Julia Wise, for example, in the EA community about this. So it's quite similar to perfectionism. There's a different scale. As I said, the formulation's slightly different. This is quite an interesting one. We've heard of Coach A and Coach B. This is Theory A and Theory B. Theory A says the problem is I'm a fraud. Theory B says the problem is I worry that I'm a fraud. And then we'd encourage people to get evidence that Theory B is true. Again, we challenge the thinking traps, discounting the positive being particularly important. Again, self-compassion would be very important. Surveys as well. That's something we do in CBT as well. So we might ask colleagues, have you ever felt that you're an imposter? Most of them would say yes at times, particularly in a new role. And then the conclusion we hope would be, we are all fallible, imperfect human beings. Nobody's perfect. Positive data log, that's where we would encourage her to look at her past and current successes. She'd probably say, yeah, but it's all luck. So we'd really kind of challenge her to take a more balanced perspective. And experiments, behave as if you are good enough, to give it yourself a chance. So in the last few minutes, I'd like you to turn to your neighbour and think about how can we, or those in the EA community or organisations in general, create a culture where imposter syndrome and perfectionism are reduced. Okay, so just a couple of minutes with your neighbour and just maybe come up with one idea between you. Okay, I'll put that up again just as a reminder. Anyone got an idea that they think would be really useful to take back to your organisation? Anyone? Is that a hand? Yeah?
Just on top of my head, how about a Google spreadsheet with like a positive data log?
Of?
Everybody can fill out for themselves.
For themselves, or indeed for other people in the organisation. I love the idea. Implement it. Tell me how you got on. Thank you very much. One more idea. Yes?
I like how during the opportunity fair, they talked a lot about the importance of value alignment.
Yes?
Over credentials.
Yes. And how would you implement that?
Sorry?
So how would you put that into practice, the value alignment?
I think the reason I like that
Yeah.
messaging
Yeah.
from the people with the opportunities is that it puts an emphasis on something that you actually can control. Instead of kind of what other people think of
Yes.
you or how
Yes.
you.
So are you living in accordance with your values rather than
Have you done impressive things?
have you done impressive things? Thank you so much. So we're nearing the end of our journey today, but you might want to take this forward. I hope you do. Again, this is another slide that sums up a lot of what we talked about today. Actually, 80,000 Hours very helpfully put a whole series of episodes together on mental health and impactful careers. That's the link for it. That's my website. Feel free to get in touch with me through that. That link is the link to this particular sheet if you want to take a copy of it or photo it. So I hope that is helpful. And I'm staying around for the rest of today and also for tomorrow till the afternoon. If you come up and want to chat to me about this material or anything else, I'd be delighted to speak to you. And finally, my takeaway message is when you go back to your organisations or your work or even your family life, try and take one idea from today with you, whether it's the two we've heard just now, or trying a stop, or trying to be a bit more like Magnus Carlsen and really have a hard and fast rule that you will do the yoga or do whatever your recreation is, regardless, whatever the one takeaway is. Can we do a deal? You'll try something? Yeah? And if you want to, let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear from you. That's you can do it via that email address. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure sharing this last hour with you. Thank you very much.